going to start at the closest measure, and then we're going to work our way back out to the farthest measure. The closest measure is, think of it this way. If I am close enough to hit him or kick him without needing a step, where am I? This is making a presa. And if I've made a presa, I don't have to take another step to kick him or to cut him. And this is on his inside. Maybe perhaps I'm on his outside over here, and I make a presa. And being, again, where I put my hand here, I don't need to take a step to punch him with my pommel or cross guard. These things are close enough. Now what's important is, how do you get there? You get to presa through the next measure if you've got your sword crossed in the middle of your opponent's. There's a name for this. This engagement right here is at the half sword. It's Stretta di Mezza Spada, the straights of the half sword. When I'm in straights of the half sword, I am in range to be able to hit my opponent with one step. I'm one step away from striking. I have to step first, and then I have to cut. And that's how that works. It might also be that I prepare my second step by getting into this engagement of Stretta di Mezza Spada and gathering my rear foot. That's a way for me to get more prepared to take my one step that I need in order to strike. I might do that in a case like this here. I turn my hand out and then take my step, and there's where I can reach him. If I'm in Stretta di Mezza Spada, I've got to recognize, without taking a step, I cannot reach my opponent. So in this technique, and this is one of dall'agocchie, I turn my hand down, thus throwing his sword down here, and there's my step, and there's where I can reach. Now, how do we get there? Do we simply start? Do we get up here and start in Stretta di Mezza Spada? No, we don't. Bolognese fencers don't do that. There is not one example in the 2,000 or so plays that we've got where that takes place. They get into Stretta di Mezza Spada from the next measure out, which is Gioco Stretto. And that's not something I just made up. That's what they said. So Gioco Stretto, consider this to be where I have to take one step and then another in order to reach my target. Why would I want to do that? Well, what does the first step do for me? What's it about? The one step is, and there you start to see the hand come back. Okay, that is something very strongly featured in Bolognese fencing. If I'm in Stretta di Mezza Spada and I want to thrust at him, I would not want to draw my hand back. That makes no sense whatsoever. You can't apply that idea here, and that's a misapplication of that idea. But if I'm in Gioco Stretto and I draw my hand back, that's perfectly permissible, and it's the norm to draw the hand back before making a thrust. And why? Because that first step is a provocation. There's my second step. My second step reaches the target, not my first. You have to understand this. And this is the measure from which we will enter into Stretta di Mezza Spada. There's my one to get me here. And so naturally I need one more to be able to hit. Provoking is one answer, but we don't just provoke. I may take the one step to beat, and there's my second step. Why are there two steps here in Gioco Stretto? The best explanation really came from Angelo Vigiani, where he was talking about whether or not to attack first. He said that'd be a great idea if when defending your opponent could also simultaneously attack in that same tempo. But they can. And so therefore you have to be aware that if my first step in Gioco Stretto is so deep as to be able to wound my opponent on the first step, I will be subject to a single time counter because I went so deep as to wound. By taking one step that falls short of that, that's my protection from the single time counter. If he tries to make that, I can still take my second step. First example to illustrate Gioco Stretto. We're both in Codalunga Stretta. If I thrust at him, and I draw my hand back and take a step, and with my left foot push a thrust, he tries to parry by falso. Now, if I'm making a provocation, what's the point of making provocation? To do what? To gain what? An advantage, right? I provoke in order to gain advantages. When he parries that, I avoid that, and there's my advantage. It's an advantage of tempo. That his blade doesn't stop on my blade. I draw it back so he can see it. When I draw it back, I keep it pointed at his face. I take a step, I stick it out. When he goes to hit it with a falso, I turn my palm down, avoiding that step, and strike him in the head with a mandrito, passing my right foot. So there you can see a technique in Gioco Stretto. This comes from Mancellino. So I go in knowing what I'm going to do. Draw it back, step, step. And that is my hit before he could parry it. And in this case, he just parries by Mezza, which means it's not his false edge, but his true edge that he will parry with by simply turning the body, and his shoulders will change places. Now in this case, if that's sort of what I see that triggers me to avoid differently, not at all the same sort of avoidance. When I step forward with the left foot in the half measure here, and he parries that way, I'll drop my point. I won't raise my hand, I won't turn my palm. So take it back, step forward, drop that step again, and tramazzone. So tramazzone is not the same thing as mandrito. And you can see why. It's a different delivery. Step, provoke, drop, roll it over and strike. Taking another step, there's my second step that was required to hit my target. Now this one starts in Codalunga Alta. Mancellino says something interesting here, unusual, especially to most people's ears, that he says, after having passed your right foot forward, push your thrust to his face. That's an unusual thing to say. Push your thrust to the face. Why would you do that? Well, look at what he says the other person does in response. You see, I see him draw his hand back, and then he steps, I see him step forward, and I think, oh, I see what he's doing. I'm going to step in. I'm going to step in and parry that. So that maybe I can hit him in the face with a reversal. The patient here, in this play, doesn't stand still and parry. The person advances, passing forward with the right foot. So as the patient here, I see him pull his hand back. I see him step his foot in and push a thrust. I step in. Why? I'm in a great place to hit him in the face. When he does that, we talked about the measure, though, of Gioco Stretto, 2 steps out. But recognize here, if I take a step, and he takes a step, right here, I strike him in the head without needing my second step because he took it for me. He stepped in. I don't have to take a second step. He met me, putting himself in range. And that reverso he was going to try to hit me with, not going to happen. Did you see why? I draw this back, I step in, I push a thrust. He steps and parries with his true edge. If he tries to hit me, this will get thrown around, and I will hit him in the head with my mandrito. It's a very cool technique. Draw back and take a step and push a thrust. He steps in to parry with his true edge so that we are here. Even if he tries to swing that at my head, this happens, and the mandrito. As with all push thrust provocations, I pull that hand back. In this case, I step my foot forward and push a thrust. He steps in. I turn that around and strike him in the head with a mandrito. I wouldn't hesitate there. I would do that quick. If I step in, it's got to go like that. It will stop and prevent him from cutting me in that tempo. Draw it back, step and push, bring it around, cut. See how his sword is thrown to my inside. Gioco Stretto, 2 steps away, but it can take different forms. Here's another. We're going to start in Cinghiara, Porti per Stretta. I provoke, draw my hand back. He parries by falso without, in this case, without moving his feet. I go 1, 2. But what kind of footwork did I use? I went first in with the right foot, as Mancellino says, with my provocation, sending him in at the same time together. Because it's a provocation, I don't want him to hit it, correct? So I step in, but I gather, step and gather, so that now I take another step, advancing with my right foot. So it is 2 steps, but it's the same foot, twice. I gather my left foot in preparation, so that when I provoke with my thrust, with my step, I gather here, trying to do that so quickly that he wouldn't have a chance to stop it. Part of that, though, is the element of surprise. Okay, right now we're training, and he knows what I'm going to do because I just explained it. So something else we see is the other person also stepping forward. So again, now what's happened, right? So I would have been required to take 2 steps, but now that has changed because my opponent took a step as well. Now there's a couple remedies. Let's move on to this one. There's a couple of remedies from Mancellino for this. And because we were in very close range, when I do this, if he hits that, or even if he doesn't, look how close I am to being cut right here. So what Mancellino proposes in this case is a couple. If he steps forward, if I see his body moving towards me when I step forward. One is that when I see him moving toward me, I jerk that back, step out here and stab at his face. Be very careful with that. My step there, though, is not so much about measure. It's a sideways step. You see why I needed to step like that? I don't want to get hit in the face. If he again steps forward, and remember we're 2 steps out, but he stepped forward when I did this. Now, if I avoid that, if I step one more time, what measure does that put me in? Presa measure, where I need no steps to cut. Now this actually is a buckler play, and if I had a buckler here, imagine that, a little kind of a pot lid shield, and I provoked, but he stepped forward. When he did that, I go here, I put my buckler right here and slam this into his legs. But you see the idea of measure. If we're 2 steps out, like if he didn't step at all when he did his falso, but I took a step, that's when I could take my 2nd step. But he did step. Now he kind of robbed me of my 2nd step because he took it. Well, now if I do take another step, because I don't need to, but if I did, where does that place me? What measure? Presa measure. Because now 1, 2 plus one other one equals 3, right? Presa measure. And in this case, since I don't have a buckler, that just means I would grab at his forte instead. But I need a step to do it. So I take one, he takes one. We'll avoid step. Bam! If we are close enough where I can reach and take a hold of my opponent's sword here, I do not need to take another step in order to cut, or kick. If I'm close enough to put my hand on the arm of my opponent, I'm close enough to strike or cut without taking another step. We call this range presa. Really, presa is the act of putting your free hand, if you're talking about a one-handed sword, or always your non-dominant hand, if we're talking about a two-handed sword, putting it on your opponent or their sword. Stretta di Mezza Spada. That means the narrow, the half sword. Which means we are at the centers of our swords, And how many steps do I need to take in order to cut somebody? One. I've got to take one step in order to reach him. There's one step, and I take another step back. Here's Gioco Stretto. I'm 2 steps away, right? One step for what? Provocations. One step for provocation, another step to actually wound. Or one step to, maybe you're in Porta Alta. One step as a beat, another step to wound. 2 steps away. Some of the assaulting are about being in Gioco Largo. It's really about these things being not as much combative and more about being demonstration pieces, show pieces, performance pieces. Done also for your own development. Mentioned instead of the assaulting are to make your arms and legs agile and quick and strong. So it's done for your own development. Also, the widest measure, Gioco Largo, Morozzo said of that, this is what people do in the beginning. Meaning, we start beginners out 3 steps out so they don't hurt each other because they can't control themselves. So, Gioco Largo, 3 steps away. And we're going to illustrate this with Morozzo's part 2 of the second assault. So the secondo assalto part 2 starts out in Gioco Largo because we have 3 steps before we can actually hit somebody. The first action I make is a mandrito tondo to the legs, passing my right foot forward. So you see the way this begins here and turns around through guardia di testa, and I step mandrito tondo toward the leg. This doesn't stop, it goes right up back to its original position, and I step diagonally over here, and then I thrust, stepping forward again, causing him to react in fear. What's important is to understand that in Morozzo's own description, this first action I make causes no reaction from my opponent. Why would it? It's so far out. It's in Gioco Largo. The only reaction we see happens on the next step. So this is brought around toward the legs. You're not trying to cut those legs, obviously. It enters, continues on up back into this position. From here, the point is at the face. I take a step, thrusting above his sword with a step. That causes him to react in fear. That's the first time we see anything out of this person. If my first step was close enough to cause him fear, Morozzo would have said so, and then why would I make my second step to cause him fear? That doesn't make sense. So you see the idea here. To the legs, continue on up and take a step here, so that I can go here. That is the time where I can finally reach him. So you see, Gioco Largo is about being 3 steps away. Now, is all real fighting going to be in Gioco Largo? No. Gioco Largo is really what we see reserved for these assaulti, which are, again, more performance pieces. What Anonymous says about Gioco Largo, here's in Gioco Largo you can do all this stuff that's pleasing to the crowd. All these big cuts, all these large motions, and the crowd's going to really love it. But when we see the fighting get serious, we don't see Gioco Largo. Gioco Largo is also for beginners. We can practice our free play out here without really ever worrying about wounding each other because we're further out. We keep it this range. Imagine, hundreds of years ago they didn't have this high-tech protective gear that we have today. So they had to have a mechanism, a method by which they could train more safely. And you can't start that too close or that will feel funky. If I tried to do the same thing from Gioco Stretto, if I try to do, here we are, see? Here we are. I tried to do the first part. I tried to do the second part. See, he wants to parry that right away. He has to react to that one, right? Because he doesn't know how deep I could go deep enough to hit him. So he's got to start reacting right away. And then I try to do my second one. I interrupt here, and all of a sudden, now what? Oh my gosh. The whole thing is screwed up. That's wrong. you can't do a Gioco Largo play in Gioco Stretto, you're going to think it's, you're going to think it's awful and wrong and stupid, and you don't want to do it.